Hey, Dr. Jerrica, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brett. Thanks for having me.
You look amazing, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
I love your glasses, and you're in a tank top. Aren't you in Colorado?
I am. The weather's really funny out here and also my apartment. So it's actually snowing outside right now, but our apartment, like the heat just comes on for the season.
Uh-huh.
And the last couple days have been kind of warm, like up into the 50s. So whenever that happens, because the heat, you can't shut it off, the whole apartment is like really hot. But I'm still kind of like in this cloud of warmth while I'm looking at the snow outside
Yeah,
the window.
like you look like you're ready for the beach.
And also, yeah, and I love the beach and I love warm weather. So it's kind of like some wishful thinking as well.
Oh my gosh. I went to Colorado one time, and it was last year on vacation, and I had been living in Houston for 8 years, which has 100% humidity every day of the week of the year. And I went to Colorado and I had so many nosebleeds. So many, because my skin was just like, I was like a little snake. Like,
So dry out here. I'm like
dry.
putting lotion on all the time.
Oh my God, all the lotion. Oh my gosh. Well, I am really excited to hear your story. We always kick off these interviews with learning about our guest, because we can probably read some article about all your achievements and stuff, but I don't have a typical, upbringing that would lead someone to think, oh, she's going to be a venture capitalist. I against the odds am where I am. And so we always love to hear people's stories. So why don't you kick it off by telling us where you're from, growing up, where did you study, and then how did you end up here?
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, I'm Jerrica. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I guess just a little background. So I'm a parent, I have a 3-year-old mother. I'm a trans woman. I'm a physician and an educator, and I love teaching about, I think, all things within health, but especially gender affirming care, which we'll talk about. So I grew up in North Carolina, which I understand is where you're located now, in my hometown. So, and it's funny, I grew up in North Carolina, I grew up in Raleigh, and I think I was like constantly trying to find my ticket out for a long time. And I was like, I'll go to California for college. Oh, it didn't happen. Like, I'll go to California for medical school. It didn't happen, So, so I was in North Carolina for a long time. I went to college there, went to medical school, and finally did leave to go to residency. And so I did my medical residency in Colorado. I'm out here in Denver. And it was in residency where I first got into gender affirming care on a clinical level. And helped kind of create some protocols and a curriculum around what we say like LGBTQ plus care comprehensively, but a big part of that was providing, for example, gender affirming hormone therapy and teaching residents and faculty how to do that. And then from there, just kind of, I fell in love with it. It really just became this super powerful process, I think, to be a part of as a clinician, but also just like anybody, on the trans journey and working with folks on the gender journey.
And so journey, at that point, were you already transitioned, or were,
Yeah, so at that point I had not come out yet. And so this was like all kind of like a building process, and went through my own processing, and worked several years in primary care practice where I was doing gender affirming care and still teaching on it before I even was able to kind of come out myself because of like social circumstances and everything.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
But even before I went to medical school, I think like what really drew me to medicine was looking at that as a vehicle to help lift up the voices of marginalized communities. And so I've kind of always looked at those avenues as I've been in medical school and then into residency, and so like worked for the past 5 years in a community health center, and like a federally qualified health center. And so I think professionally that's just where my interests have always been. And then like on the gender affirming care pathway, I really got into that in residency, and I've been doing that in the scope of primary care for the last 5 years now. And then recently started Plume, which is a company dedicated to gender affirming care.
Amazing. I heard Sue Wern, our amazing Sue Wern. If anyone knows FemTech Focus on the inside, she is literally my right hand woman. Can't do anything without her. She said that you started a company before Plume and actually pivoted to Plume. Is that true?
So it's technically the same company, but we were under a different name, and we like we rebranded, and then we launched as Plume. So some people might know us as Mariposa or Mariposa Health, which was our initial name, but same company, same service.
Okay.
Rebranded to a different name. Yeah.
That is honestly quite common. You know, I have founders that are like, what do we call ourselves? I'm like, just pick a domain name that's $10. Don't worry too much about it, you know, because once you get investors, they're probably going to tell you to change it. So Plume, what is Plume?
Yeah, so Plume is a gender affirming healthcare service. And so we're a virtual service and direct to consumer, as opposed to the sort of traditional brick and mortar system of healthcare where you have to, find a clinic and make sure it aligns with your insurance. And so what that means is that you can just log into our website and get a consult with a clinician, so a physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant who has expert training, and many of whom are trans themselves, in gender affirming care, and then get prescriptions and have ongoing monitoring, all just by logging onto a website and then keeping communication with your provider by texting with an app on your phone.
Whoa. How long ago did you start this?
So we, I guess, officially launched as Plume in June of this year, like May, June of 2020. And, the idea, my co-founder, Matthew, and I had been really starting to talk about, I guess, February of 2019, and started a pilot in August of 2019, just a very small level here in Denver. And then we eventually got funding and started to build our team out, and then that's when we launched.
Amazing. Are you funded by like angels or venture capital or grants?
Yeah, angels and venture capital. Yeah.
Really?
So
oh my gosh.
Yeah, we closed on our seed round at the I guess like right at the beginning in Q1 of this year. And so it was super exciting. We had this pilot going, and a big part of that was just like talking to the community, like talking to other trans folks, talking to clinicians, and our patients that we had at the time, and being, I think because we both felt it was really valuable, and like strongly believe that this needed to exist in the world, knowing that it can be very hard to access gender affirming care. And we kept getting that feedback. And so we took that and, turned it into a pitch, and we wanted to get funding to be able to build this out on a wide scale. And that's what I've seen throughout all my career. There's amazing people doing gender affirming care and providing great healthcare, but it's very isolated geographically, and it just doesn't reach a lot of people. So we wanted to build something that could be scaled across an entire country, with expertly trained providers.
Yeah. Well, I had a therapist in Houston, and she was in the LGBT community very intensely, and she's very knowledgeable. And I would tell her about FemTech Focus, and because that's what I talk about in therapy, right? If you're a founder, you probably talk about your company in therapy. Yeah. And I would tell her about FemTech Focus, and she'd say, what about the trans community? Will like investors invest in like trans health stuff? And I would tell her, I mean, if the market's big enough, I said, that's always the biggest key, is like, if the market isn't worth more than $1 billion, they're not going to invest. So I'm actually really curious. I know, I usually don't go as like how I built this with my, with my guests, but I'm really curious, how big is the trans health market? Is it over $1 billion?
Yeah. I mean, the short answer is yes. It's really funny. And I mean, it's amazing, I think, first and foremost, that, that we landed funding, venture capital funding for a business, started by trans people, like for trans people, right? Like even just to say those words is pretty remarkable to me still. And the awesome thing is we're seeing more trans founders coming to the venture capital world and getting funding. But if you look at, let's just say, like the most kind of basic estimates, which is from the Williams Institute, which were released in 2016. And so at that time, they said there was like 0.6% of the population estimated is trans, which was about 1.4 million people. Now, if you fast forward that to now, just with the current population, it's about 1.9 million people. But we've also had other surveys come out that suggests that, like Generation Z, for example, is 4 times more likely to identify as trans than baby boomers. And that individuals between the ages of 20 to 35 are actually like upwards of 10 to 12% actually identify as not cis, right? So anything outside of that traditional gender binary, and that's massive, 10 to 12% compared to 0.6%. So, where does the truth lie? It'll probably evolve and change as people feel more comfortable in coming out and presenting, coming to healthcare providers and things like that. As we go along, but the short story is that it's actually way more than 2 million people, and when you take that population that's severely underserved and just doesn't have those access points, then yeah, it's actually like a pretty robust population.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm definitely gonna send this to my old therapist this episode when it comes out, because that was something I'd say, they could potentially be invested in, but venture capitalists just care about the market size, and money. So I don't know if it's big enough. And it's really interesting. I wonder where the correlations are, if any, between like this rise in like questioning gender and what you want to be in the spectrum, and the rise of like FemTech, so focusing on women's health and wellness in innovation and medicine, because it's like I don't know what it is, but in like the last decade or so, 2 decades maybe, people are starting to be like, hey, like this was made for a man. Like, has anyone ever thought about how this could be better for women if we changed this part of a seatbelt, or we change this, if we ever actually tested drugs on women before it hit the market, like in clinical trial, like, I feel like there's like this opening of like awareness or something, do you feel that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think there's a couple things that makes me think about, one is what we believe strongly at Plume is this idea of identity resonant or identity based care, where it's like treating hypertension, for example, if you're treating hypertension by the book, it's like, same medications every time, same dose adjustments every time. And that's sort of traditionally how the medical system has, treated people, right? Yeah. It's like, nothing else matters and everybody goes through the same, prescriptive process. But in actuality, yeah, like we know that identity matters. We know there are many social determinants of health, which contribute to all of our health. And if you try to move people through a system that it's not built for, because who was the medical system built for, right? It was white, cis, straight men.
Yeah. Yep.
And gradually we've been kind of chipping away at that. But still, in many ways, that is the foundation which our healthcare system is built upon. And so, yes, we have to change that for sure. And we have to think about like, how does this affect different people differently? Yes. And can we actually have a different approach to the care? And so, I think with the trans community, for example, right, there's so many things in the system which are inadequate in terms of even one, just acknowledging like who we are, right? And then like addressing us appropriately. But also thinking about like, what are those kind of maybe physical and health things that are unique to us as a community, right? And understand there's a lot of variance there too. So so I think, and that can definitely just transcend to like many and all communities, and especially those who are marginalized and have been left out of the system. And I think like also to even just like thinking, how do we think about like FemTech and like, what does that mean, right? And that, as I mentioned, there's definitely like a strong identity piece to that, and social determinants of health related to identity, but there's also just the physical nature of it, right? And like, literally like body parts that are different from other people and have not been addressed adequately by the healthcare system. And, I think acknowledging that like there's been people who might not have those body parts, but still are impacted because of bias towards femme people, right? And like, and how we engage in the system. And there are those folks who have maybe perhaps body parts that are traditionally thought of as femme or women or female, but who don't hold those identities, who identify as masculine, mask, man, male, non-binary, genderqueer, you name it. But yet they still have the necessity to like have appropriate care for that part of their body. And so, there's a lot of complexity to it. And I think that's why I think of it in a very like broad definition of like FemTech and fem health.
Oh my gosh, this is deep. This is like I feel like we need to write a thesis on this or something. Like this is very I need to pull resources, critically think about this. Well, I want to go through some terms that you've already been using
Yeah.
and that are like on Plume's website and stuff. And I would just love for you to kind of define it for us and tell us like what that means and the significance. So let's start with gender affirming care. You've said it a bunch of times. What is gender affirming care?
Yeah, gender affirming care. I think of gender affirming care as kind of the umbrella term, like a more broader take on just affirming care. I think I say within a healthcare setting, but you can even extend that beyond a healthcare setting. But what that means is really just compassionately and competently um, providing care for somebody. And so, right, addressing them appropriately, using their name and the pronouns that they go by, not making assumptions about somebody because of the way they look or the way they sound. So there's a lot of just very basic interpersonal connection that occurs and that is affirming outside of having a license, or being able to write a prescription or doing some kind of action for that person in a professional setting. But when we get to the professional settings, there are things like gender affirming hormone therapy, like just like our services are based around at Plume, which are critical for a lot of trans folks. Not everybody obviously wants or desires to take hormones or have surgery, but it is very important for many people. Surgery is another example, but it could extend definitely beyond the healthcare arena. So like legal things, changing your name, legally changing your name, legally changing your gender marker, finding a competent therapist, another great example. So affirming care really is just, again, like compassionately acknowledging an individual and whatever that setting might be. And then there can be like specific cases within different industries.
Mm-hmm. What is the chances of us like helping current MDs become more gender affirming? Or is it like a lost cause and we should just focus on med school and then like hope for future generations to be better? Because I feel like MDs are so busy, like, and I don't know if this is on top of their list of priorities. Like, is there any initiative around that?
There definitely is an initiative. Yeah. I mean, that's what I've like devoted my life to.
Okay, good. Good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I'm still, like literally like, every day I'm training, clinicians to take care of trans folks. But even before I started Plume, that was, and that's why I think eventually I started Plume was because, I've worked to train clinicians within like the healthcare setting I was working in. I've taught and lectured at clinics that I was not a part of, private clinics, community health centers, academic institutions, medical schools, schools of pharmacy, you name it. And I think it's all critical. So it can be discouraging sometimes for sure. Now, I think they're like the clinician base just is changing, like evolving rapidly, right? Like, I think there's a lot of folks who really take this social justice approach to medicine, which is why I got into it in the first place, that I think are kind of in our generations now, and certainly a lot in older generations, but I think even more now. And so I think clinicians are much more receptive to it, certainly now compared to 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years ago. And I think ultimately, yes, it like has to come at the medical or at the medical training level, right? Whether that's a medical school, nurse practitioner school, PA school, social work, psychology, whatever it is, because that's the workforce. Now, the downside or what's hard with that is a long play. It's like, if I go in and give training to medical students, they're not even going to enter the workforce until like at least 7 years, right? That's just like, it doesn't even like make sense, but if you compare to any other profession, but that's the case. And so 7 years from now, that's a lot of time, right? I think especially as any marginalized person who is experiencing disparities and has like a lot of risk because of that. So that has to happen, but then what do we do in the meantime is the question, so then it's like, okay, well, let's train our active clinicians, and that's part of it. But even with that, it's still hard to reach a lot of people because most clinicians are going to gather towards large metropolitan areas, and especially those that tend to be perhaps more interested, in gender affirming care and different care for marginalized communities. because that's where a lot of those clinics tend to be. So then you go a step further, and it's like, all right, well, how do we take, all those people that want to do this care, who have the experience and go ahead and provide it, and those that maybe don't have it but are willing to learn,
Yeah.
and then offer that skill set to an entire country, and so that's how where Plume came to be. And so that's kind of like that next step of creating the access, leveraging a widely distributed provider network that can provide care under one roof.
Yeah. So here's a question. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. I have a friend who recently got pregnant, was not intended. She made an appointment with her OB-GYN, said, hey, I think I'm pregnant. I missed my period. This is not the right time. Can I have the abortion pill? And the doctor said, I am allowed to prescribe it to you technically, but the group that I work in, like the clinic itself, apparently there was some doctors there that are like OB-GYNs that are anti-abortion. So that doctor, even though he was like, of course, like you are just like a responsible woman who's like trying to like just live her life and get this pill, like I can't prescribe it to you. You have to go to Planned Parenthood. My question for you, because we could definitely talk about that. I have a lot of emotions about it. I have a lot of feelings. And we do have abortion episodes, but my question for you is that also an issue in trans health where there's a trans individual goes to a clinic and like, there's some kind of like, we can't treat you here because somebody here doesn't believe in it or something? Does that exist too?
It does, unfortunately. Yeah. There, up to a third of trans people are actively discriminated against in a healthcare facility, which is, it's mind-boggling to me, right? These are professionals who've like, signed this oath to take care of people. And not just like, oh, I don't have the skills to do this, but right, active discrimination and prejudice. And those are two things which are a big part of it, right? One, you have an inadequately trained workforce, but also just rampant bigotry and discrimination. And so yeah, that happens a lot, unfortunately. And we hear that a lot from our—
That's not like illegal?
Not like what?
That's not illegal to say,
oh,
like, I can't treat you?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? With the HHS rollbacks that occurred, actually, you could consider that legal now, right? So what they did is they said that from the Trump administration was that it now is legal to not provide care to a trans person, whether that's health insurance coverage or just clinical care because they're trans. It allowed for that, and so hopefully those get turned back. But yeah, so I mean, even within our country, that could be considered legal. Now there are states which have protections against that, but not all states do.
Yeah. Well, you let us know at FemTech Focus if you're going to do a letter writing campaign. We will write letters. Like, I'm all for making the government, abide by the people they're supposed to represent. Anyways, again, another episode. I can see it's already. I wanted to ask you, about, so like, here's all the doom and gloom. I always love to provide solutions. So what is a way that healthcare and digital health could be more inclusive? Like, what are actions they could be taking?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it just comes down to education for one, right? I mean, first and foremost, I think a willingness to just be cooperative with different people. I mean, cooperative isn't the right word. It's just like, yeah, be compassionate, like be open-minded, just like stop making assumptions and just, stop being bigoted. I don't know. Like there's just like some basic stuff that needs to happen. But I think even with well-intentioned folks, like might be doing things that they don't realize are necessarily damaging and traumatizing to individuals. So doing a lot of self-education, I think, like bringing in, which can look like a lot of different things, but even just like having a training day, to talk about just kind of like quote unquote, like gender 101 or trans 101, like at an all staff meeting, in a clinical setting, for example, or whatever your business is. And I think just to have more context, right, to have more depth of understanding of the lived experience of an individual going through that every day, right? Like understanding that walking to your clinic, like being in your clinic to get gender affirming care does not start when the physician or the clinician or nurse practitioner, whoever walks in the room. It starts when they leave their door, right? And like have to walk through their apartment and then through their parking lot and like, you know, risk whatever people might be saying to them and getting misgendered along the way, going through public transit, arriving to the door, and then going through like 5 different people before they actually get in the room to talk about what they want to talk about that day. So I think just having even a very basic understanding of what does it mean to be trans can go a long way. And then, like I said, not assuming, you know, don't assume people's gender, don't assign people's gender, don't use pronouns that you don't know people.
Well, I've never seen like an intake form at a doctor's office that asks me my pronouns.
Yeah.
No, I've never seen that before.
Yeah. Right. It's like seemingly such a simple thing, but it can sometimes feel like such a big lift to have a clinic do, you know.
Well, currently I'm super upset with Eventbrite because their like default is what is your gender, and it says male or female.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, why? And I get upset with Sue Wern, and she's like, I promise it's not me. She's like, it's Eventbrite's default.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, haven't people emailed them about this? Like,
yeah, you know what's amazing? I mean, like this is the thing, because like if we do say something about this, it does go a long way.
Yeah.
You know, we're working to literally build systems at Plume that do this, right? That acknowledge people appropriately with the technology. You know, and in doing so, because we work with like so many different technology companies along the way, I mean, we've actually like influenced companies to change the way they do things, to change their intake forms, to change like, you know, it really is amazing and stuff that I wouldn't have necessarily dreamed of being a result of starting this company. But you know, I mean, I think people do see that, they see the power in it when you can really get behind and explain why it's important to do. And then it kind of becomes contagious. And, you know, and these are like, you know, big companies, corporations.
Come on, Eventbrite, publicly, you know,
no, like just time to get Eventbrite on here. but yeah, so there's a lot of things you can do, and I think that's kind of the very basic service level, individual service level. But of course, there's just, you know, your messaging to the community. You know, what are your, if you're, depending on what your service is, right? Are you kind of talking about it in very binary terms? Are you you know, what are other organizations you're aligning with? You know, and the list goes on all the way up the rungs to advocacy and things like that. So,
yeah. Well, I'm a scientist and I'm actually a total nerd. My dog's names are Trypsin and Quark, you know, an enzyme in a physics term. So, I mean, really nerdy. I'd love for us to talk a little bit about hormone replacement therapy. First, maybe just like a definition of it. And then I would love to dig in a little bit to the biology of it, because even I have some questions about like, how long do you have to be on these hormones? Like, how is it bad for your health? Like things like that. So first, tell us about what is hormone replacement therapy?
Yeah. So, and in fact, instead of saying hormone replacement therapy, what we typically say is gender affirming hormone therapy.
Oh, okay.
And so like GAHT, and the reason being is because hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, even though it is a term that has been widely adopted, we'll say it by the trans community within gender affirming care work, actually originates as being, it's like hormone treatment for traditionally cis folks, right? So maybe going through menopause or having like low testosterone later in life. And so literally replacing those hormones, whereas this is kind of more the affirming process. We're not necessarily replacing anything, but, you know, kind of putting something there as it should be in the first place, as felt by a lot of these individuals.
So hormone affirming replacement therapy?
Yeah, gender affirming hormone therapy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, and so what is that? I mean, so it's you know, the use of hormones, just as it sounds, the use of hormones to affirm one's gender, and it goes beyond hormones too. Hormones are a component of it, but there's also kind of adjuvant medications we use to supplement that process. That can, for example, like maybe block the effects of undesired hormones while we're actually giving the desired hormones, and some medicines that are used to kind of counteract some of the side effects of hormones.
And the two hormones mostly we're talking about is estrogen and testosterone?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. Because I am always surprised on the show when I'm like, oh, you know, like this, and they're like, actually, that's what the world thinks it's wrong. And so I just want to make sure it is those are the two hormones are most.
Those are the two main ones. Yeah. And then, progesterone is another hormone that we use as well. And, and then, yeah, like I said, some kind of supplementary medications, but yeah.
And at what age, like, are people allowed to start their gender affirming therapy with these hormones? Like, is there an age that they're allowed to start doing that, or they have to wait to a certain age? And like, what are the consequences of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's several guidelines that are out there. UCSF Center of Excellence for Transgender Health has kind of a pretty comprehensive set of guidelines. WPATH, or the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, was one of the first, I guess, institution to create guidelines, first in 1979, and there's the Endocrine Society as well. So WPATH for a long time had been the ones kind of setting the stage for what, like you're talking about, like what is an appropriate age to start and that kind of thing. For a long time, they had suggested 16 years old to start hormones specifically. So not puberty blockers, right? That's a different thing, which I'll explain. But in practice, a lot of folks are starting as early as 14 years old, just depending on the specific scenario, which can depend on access to puberty blockers, for example. They can be really hard to get in many cases. They can be very expensive. Also, there just could be a really excessive amount of dysphoria and from not being able to start hormones. You can imagine, like, even if you are lucky, you get access to puberty blockers. So you've halted your puberty, but now you're like stuck in like no puberty land.
Yeah.
All of your peers around you are developing, right? So that can be challenging too. But puberty blockers are completely reversible. So those are basically a medication that we've used for many, many, many years in kids to stop puberty. Another use that it's used for is what we call precocious puberty, when puberty is starting like very early and developing fast. For cis folks who we want to like kind of pause that for a little bit, but works well for trans folks as well for the same reason, that this is an undesired puberty in this case, right? So you can think of just the massive amount of trauma that one would go through, like having to go through that. So if we can have an opportunity to stop that process, allow that adolescent to continue processing as needed. And then start hormones when and if it's appropriate for that individual as they decide. Yeah.
And what if they change their mind? It's not like if you start doing, taking testosterone or estrogen blockers, like you can't ever go back, right? That's not the case.
Yeah, with puberty blockers, they're completely reversible. So if you were to stop those, then the person would just start going through puberty as their kind of hormones and body parts would dictate. And now, as far as hormones like testosterone or estrogen, they do have some irreversible changes. We kind of consider quote unquote everything to be irreversible, but there are some things that are probably more long-standing or irreversible than others. So I think like that is certainly something to keep in mind and to acknowledge, and also. Like the kind of, I think of it as like a decision to pursue hormones or not, right? Like, which is a very complicated decision, and it's not a reflection necessarily at all of one's identity, whether the choice to take hormones or not take hormones, right? But many decisions influence that, or many factors influence that decision. Unfortunately, with being so much stigma and pressure around that, there could be a moment where somebody decides maybe not to continue hormone therapy, but of course, like doesn't alter just intrinsically who that individual is.
Yeah, totally. And I think I remember this from our interview with Claire, that there are some health consequences if you like abruptly stop using your hormones. And we were talking about this in terms of access to healthcare and health insurance, right? So what are some of those consequences? Is that true?
Yeah, there definitely are effects from that. I mean, I wouldn't say anything, well, let's just say like that's like physically or medically life-threatening, but the problem is it definitely can be very uncomfortable. So for example, if somebody were taking estrogen and stopped it all of a sudden, you're basically kind of throwing somebody into a menopause, right? So you just like suddenly have like no estrogen in your body. And so you can have hot flashes and, just mood changes and feeling very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If somebody were to suddenly stop taking testosterone, similarly, can get a lot of mood changes that can come with that. But also, for example, testosterone for many people is important for stopping periods or causing amenorrhea, as we say. So if suddenly you then started to bleed again, like that could be incredibly dysphoric, right?
Yeah.
So I think while those medical things, again, are not life-threatening themselves, but the big problem comes into play, like what is the psychological damage of that? Like, losing access to hormones, losing access to that information, and having these like physical processes, while not life-threatening, can be very discomforting and then induce, more feelings of anxiety and depression, that kind of thing.
Wow. This is incredible. You are doing such important work. What are some of your goals for Plume in the future?
Yeah. So when we think of ourselves at Plume, we think of ourselves as a broadly like gender affirming care company, and we've started with hormone therapy.
Mm-hmm.
We've definitely recognized that as a major access gap for the trans community. But beyond that, again, there are many important pieces of that gender affirmation journey. It could look like other prescription services that are helpful. I think like emotional support obviously is huge, right? Not to say like you have to have a therapist to start, hormones and all that kind of stuff, which used to be the case, and you had to have a letter. Like definitely we don't advocate for that, and we use fully informed consent to start, meaning that the person decides, and it's not up to us to decide. But with that being said, obviously any big life change, any transition process, it can be helpful to have emotional support. So I think we're really looking into now, what does that mean? Is there something beyond like the traditional one-on-one therapist that can provide that emotional support on a very wide scale? Working around finding solutions to help with legal processes, just like, again, changing your gender marker, your name, or your whether on whatever document, passport, license, birth certificate, it differs in every state, and there's like some good resources out there. Like Solace, for example, is a trans-founded company that helps with that process. And I think like, also looking at how do we do that, in a more individual level as well. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of ways, but I think we see ourselves kind of finding every way possible to really just comprehensively support that gender affirmation journey.
I love it. And you actually brought up something that I forgot to ask, and I wanted to ask real quick, which is you offer a letter writing service. What is that?
Yeah, so for those that have already signed up for the membership and are getting hormone therapy, we provide letters of support for surgery, because that's oftentimes needed. Even though you don't need letters for hormone therapy, there is still a requirement with insurance companies and surgeons that you have to have a letter of support from a medical provider. Oftentimes, and actually,
Really?
yeah, from a therapist as well. So we'll provide the medical letter, and also can provide letters for gender marker and legal name change, as is required in some states.
Ooh, and it's just you as a MD saying like, I give my blessings to this happening. Like, what are you saying?
Yeah. It sounds as ridiculous as you just made it. Thank you. Like, I didn't even have to say anything. Like, I love that I can explain this to somebody. There's like, you have to like get what?
Blessing it. You're giving a little like...
Thank you. Yes. Hopefully it goes away. I hope it's a service that Plume like never has to provide in the future. But as it stands now, yes, you actually have to get a letter from a clinician, and in some cases specifically a physician, just to say like the person has quote unquote undergone treatment and like is now this gender. It's horrible, archaic language.
Yeah, like
not
reflective. Would have a bad day and like show up to the surgeon and say like, yeah, I feel like this today, and like that's not probably a problem that exists.
No, it is not. It is not by any means. And so it is a little bit of like, just kind of playing the system and checking the boxes. And I think that's a big part of it, right? Is like, from an affirmation piece, like you could have one clinic that can provide the letter, but can also do it in a really non-affirming way, right? Where maybe you have this like extensive interview and you're asking all these questions and you're like, but how do you know, like, it was just like very inappropriate stuff, versus like someone who's trans, just like, we get it, right? It's like, right, you need this letter. Like, we're going to provide you this letter. We're going to, of course, check for medical things, make sure you're safe to have surgery and that kind of thing, and give recommendations. But like, it's not our job, again, to decide like who's trans and how trans you are, is nobody's and so it is like, it's sad, but it is silly that these things exist. And so hopefully that the system evolves. And interestingly, WPATH is about to put out a new guideline for the first time since 2011. So we'll see. I don't know, maybe there will be some language that softens that requirement, but I think it'll take some time.
Wow, I had no idea. All of the different barriers to getting the healthcare you need, right? So hard. All right. So I've had such a fun time with you. I really would love to be your friend in real life. This has been so awesome. I'm so inspired. We have 2 last questions that our listeners love. The first one is, if someone wanted to start a FemTech company, what's an area in health and wellness that you think still needs innovating?
Yeah, you could probably pick a lot of things. I think taking that kind of like identity lens, and it could probably be like literally any, healthcare piece, but maybe something that's more specific. I think certainly, right, a lot of work to do in kind of the trans care environment. You mentioned one that was great, family planning access and abortion care access, right?
Yes.
Very, very underserved in terms of that. In fact, there's like a really awesome company. I don't know if you know them, Hey Jane.
Hey Jane, yes. I was a judge in a pitch competition that she was in, and I was like, hell yes. Like,
oh, nice. Yeah.
Getting the pill, so inconvenient. So inconvenient.
Yeah. So I mean, like, that's, we're starting to see stuff there. I think like another one, for example, Black pregnant folks, right? We know experience significant disparities compared to non-Black and especially white pregnant folks. So I think there's a lot that can be done in that whole arena of, obstetric care, and kind of pre and post as well. And which again can largely be leveraged by technology, I think, in many ways, and providing that access and providing that sort of affirming identity resonant care that a lot of clinics are lacking. So I think those are 2 big ones I've definitely seen recently. But another one, for example, cancer screenings, right? So cervical cancer screening, again, something that affects all people with that body part, regardless of identity. And interestingly, the guidelines are changing and our technology is changing, where we can more easily and less invasively test for that, which is really important to do. But of course, traditionally has just been a very uncomfortable exam process for anybody, right? And so that's a big one. And I think for, of course, again, all individuals who have to go through that, but I think especially for a lot of trans folks who experience significant dysphoria around even like acknowledging some of those, those exams and body parts. So I'd love to see like innovation in that space as well.
There was a meme that's been going around, and it was like some man had tweeted like, that COVID test was the most invasive and uncomfortable test ever. And like a woman replied, it was like, try a pap smear, bro.
Yeah, I know. Like, so true. Yeah. It's just, again, like you just had like an ounce of like the lived experience. Yeah.
And our last question is, what do you think the femtech industry as a whole needs the most right now in order to be successful?
I think it's just like more moments like this, right? It's like, I think creating the spaces to have these creative conversations, like generate ideas, not be afraid to try them too. And I think like there are, of course, just some hard, cold truths, right? I mean, you brought it up before. We need funding, like we need investors, we need governments to actually invest in these issues. And so I think it's definitely a combination of creating the spaces to collaborate and ideate, but then also having the resources available to act on those ideas.
Do you think that we're going to get some more policies in government that may help the trans community based on some trans people getting elected recently?
Yeah, I think I do. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I mean, Biden, right? I mean, like the first president ever to actually like say the word transgender in a good way,
Yeah,
in a presidential address. And so, and knowing, and it is known that he actually has one of the most comprehensive LGBTQ plus platforms like ever. So I think, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of candidates, right, who are trans, who are queer, who've been elected. It's amazing. So yeah, no, I think especially over the next 4 years, there's a lot of hope for some, I think, significant change in policy, and even for things like Medicaid expansion, right? So like that could go up significantly, which has impact in many ways in healthcare, but especially for trans folks. Yeah.
definitely. So listeners, if you are a poli-sci major, if you are a journalist major, you're like, I'm not an innovator, I'm not a coder, I hate pitching, don't ever make me present. You could go into politics because we need you. Because the more like uteruses and different identifying folks that are in Congress, they're going to vote for Medicare to cover certain things. They're going to, we just spoke with the president of Fibroid Foundation, and she got a bill passed through Congress for fibroids. And it was like passed because all the women were like, yeah, 1 in 3 women have fibroids and they're the worst. Please pass this, and it was like $30 million a year for 5 years for fibroid research, but like, if you don't have the uteruses in there, the things that affect uteri are like not common sense, right? So
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like, yeah, it's so true. Representation in all different ways matters, and that's right.
100%.
Moving that way, but yeah, we got a lot more work to do.
You are amazing. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.